You've probably heard of the Robert Latimer case, right? It's one of the most divisive in Canadian history, and it's almost always framed as a debate about mercy killing. But what if I told you that when his first conviction went all the way to the Supreme Court, the final decision had almost nothing to do with that debate at all? Okay, let's dive into this incredible legal story and see what really happened.
Right out of the gate, these were the opening words from the Chief Justice of Canada in his 1997 ruling. He immediately changes the subject for everyone. This was not going to be a trial about the ethics of euthanasia. Instead, the court was laser-focused on something else entirely: the integrity of the legal process itself.
So, before we get into all the nitty-gritty legal arguments that defined this appeal, we first have to understand the tragic circumstances that put the Latimer family in the national spotlight in the first place.
Okay, let's set the scene. Tracy Latimer was 12 years old and lived with a very severe form of cerebral palsy. She was quadriplegic, she couldn't care for herself, and the court records show she was in constant, agonizing pain. On October 24, 1993, Robert Latimer was home alone with Tracy. When the police were called, he told them that she had simply passed away in her sleep. But that story quickly fell apart. The coroner couldn't find a natural cause of death, so an autopsy was ordered. And the results? They were shocking. Tracy's blood had incredibly high levels of carbon monoxide. Suddenly, what was reported as a peaceful death was now a homicide investigation. With those autopsy results in hand, the investigation immediately zeroed in on the Latimer farm. So, on the morning of November 4th, 1993, about a week and a half after Tracy's death, RCMP officers showed up with a plan to bring Robert Latimer in.
And things moved incredibly fast. Police get there at 8:28 a.m. Just 4 minutes later, they tell Latimer he's being detained. Less than an hour after that, he's sitting in an interview room at the police station. And by that afternoon, he's back at his own farm, reenacting the entire event on camera for the police.
At the station, police were very direct. They told Latimer they had no doubt he was responsible for Tracy's death. He then gave a full verbal confession and agreed to write it all down. But, and this is a really important detail, it was only after he confessed verbally, right before he started writing, that an officer specifically asked if he understood he could be charged with murder. That little timing detail would become a huge battleground in court.
You can probably see where this is going. Latimer's lawyers later argued that this confession, which was really the heart of the Crown's case, should be thrown out completely. Their claim? That his charter rights were violated from the second the police set foot on his property. So the first challenge was about his detention. The police were careful to use the word detained, not arrested. But the defense said, come on, this was an arbitrary detention. The court, on the other hand, looked at this legal idea called a de facto arrest, which is a fancy way of saying if it looks like an arrest and feels like an arrest, well, it's an arrest no matter what word you use.
And you know what? The Supreme Court actually agreed it was a de facto arrest. But, and this is a big but, they also ruled it was totally lawful. Why? Because the police had what's called reasonable and probable grounds. They knew about the carbon monoxide, they knew this wasn't an accident or a suicide, and they knew Latimer had both the opportunity and a potential motive. So because the arrest was lawful, it couldn't be an arbitrary detention.
But the defense didn't stop there. They argued that by using that word, detained, the police didn't properly communicate just how much trouble he was in. Their point was, how can someone make an informed decision about getting a lawyer if they don't fully get what's happening? The court, though, pushed back on that. They said, look, substance matters more than specific words. An officer had explicitly told Latimer that this had very serious consequences. He was read his rights, he was told he couldn't even go back into his own house by himself. The court basically concluded it was obvious he knew he was in an extremely grave situation.
All right, so the final challenge to the confession was the most technical one. It all revolved around the right to a lawyer and a huge case called R.V. Bartle, which had just set brand new rules for how police have to tell people about getting free legal advice.
This chart really lays out the legal pickle they were in. The new Bartle ruling said police had to tell people about the 24/7 toll-free number for legal aid. Simple, right? Well, in Saskatchewan back in 1993, that toll-free line only worked outside of normal business hours, and Robert Latimer was arrested at 8:32 in the morning, right when that line wasn't active. So the Supreme Court made a really key practical distinction here. They said the whole point of the rule is to inform people about the services that are actually available to them in that moment. Since the toll-free line wasn't working, the police didn't have to tell him about it. They told him about the local legal aid office, which was open, and the court said that was good enough. So, after all that, the confession was officially in.
Okay, so wait a minute. Let's recap. The arrest was lawful. The confession was admissible. So why are we even talking about this? There must be something else, right? Some final dramatic twist that explains why the Supreme Court decided to throw out the conviction and order a whole new trial.
This is the million-dollar question of this case. The police work, under intense legal scrutiny, held up. The confession was ruled legal. So what could possibly be so serious that it would undo an entire murder conviction?
The answer came in 2 words: fresh evidence. This was information that was completely unknown to the defense and to the judge during the original trial, and it had nothing to do with Robert Latimer's actions at all.
What came out was, frankly, shocking. Before the trial even started, the Crown prosecutor and the RCMP had secretly vetted the potential jurors. They cooked up a questionnaire asking people about their views on hot-button issues like religion and euthanasia. Then, RCMP officers actually called and questioned 30 of these people directly, and the defense was never told. But here's the real kicker. 5 of the people who were secretly questioned ended up on the actual jury that convicted Robert Latimer.
The Supreme Court's reaction was swift and absolute. They did not mince words. They called it a flagrant abusive process. This wasn't some minor procedural error. It was a profound attack on the fundamental right to an impartial jury, the very bedrock of our justice system.
And this brings us right to the real heart of the Supreme Court's decision. It ultimately wasn't about the tragic facts of Tracy Latimer's death. It was about the principles that are supposed to guarantee everyone, no matter who they are, gets a fair trial.
And that's the ultimate takeaway here. The court set aside a murder conviction not because of any doubt about the facts or the confession, but solely because the prosecution had tainted the jury process. It is definitive proof that in our legal system, how you get a verdict is just as important as the verdict itself.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about. In the long and often emotional pursuit of justice, does the integrity of the process, the rules we all agree to play by, ultimately matter more than just getting a specific outcome? It's something to think about.